You know, there's a sound that changes your life forever. And it's not always a scream or a crash sometimes, it's just a click. The cold, mechanical click of handcuffs tightening around your wrists while 200 people you've smiled at every morning for 5 years, hold up their phones to record your ruin. That was the sound Elias Thorne heard at 8:47 on a Monday morning in the pristine, glass-walled lobby of Ether Dynamics. He didn't fight, didn't shout, didn't ask why. Because when you're a black man in a corporate atrium surrounded by security guards, you know that asking questions can get you hurt. He just turned around, jaw set like granite, and let them take his dignity, his livelihood, and his freedom, all while the whispers started buzzing like angry hornets. I knew there was something off about him. A junior analyst whispered, loud enough to cut through the silence. Single dad, probably broke, saw an opportunity and took it, someone else muttered. Elias heard every single word. He felt the weight of their judgment like a physical blow, but he didn't flinch. He kept his eyes fixed on the marble floor, because inside his chest pocket, right over a heart that was hammering 1,000 miles an hour, was a folded piece of paper. A drawing, stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun, drawn by his 8-year-old daughter, Jojo. That very morning, "So I'm always with you, Daddy," she'd said. And that piece of paper was the only thing keeping him from falling apart, right there in front of the cameras. But to understand why an innocent man, a guy who spent his weekends volunteering at the food bank and his evenings helping neighbors jumpstart their dead batteries, ended up in the back of a squad car, you have to rewind 72 hours. You have to go back to a rainy Friday night and a CEO who was drowning in plain sight. Elias was a driver for the executive fleet. It's a job that requires you to be invisible. You hear the mergers, the affairs, the panic attacks in the back seat, and you say nothing. You are a ghost with a driver's license. That Friday was the company's 10th anniversary gala, a black tie affair on the rooftop of the tallest building in Seattle. Serafina Sterling, the 34-year-old CEO, a prodigy, a shark in a silk dress. The woman who turned Ether Dynamics into a billion-dollar empire was the star of the show. Or she was supposed to be. From the shadows near the catering tent, Elias watched her. He'd driven her for 3 years, knew her schedule better than she did, knew she took her coffee black with 2 ice cubes so she could drink it fast. He saw something the board members didn't. He saw the tremble in her hand as she raised a champagne flute. He saw the way she was knocking back drinks, not to celebrate, but to numb something deep and jagged inside her. Serafina was terrifyingly competent, but that night she was unraveling. And watching her with the eyes of a predator was Silas Vance, the director of HR. Silas was a man who had survived 3 CEO changes, a guy who smiled with his mouth but never his eyes, the kind of corporate fixer who kept files on everyone just in case he needed leverage. Elias caught Silas watching Serafina sway slightly at the podium. And the look on Silas's face wasn't concern, it was calculation. By midnight, the party was a skeleton of itself. The rain had started, a relentless Pacific Northwest downpour that turned the city lights into blurry streaks. Elias was doing his final sweep of the parking garage, ready to clock out and get home to relieve the babysitter, when he saw it. A splash of crimson silk against the gray concrete. It was Serafina. She was slumped against the tire of her Mercedes, unconscious, her expensive heels kicked off, looking less like a titan of industry and more like a broken doll. Elias froze. His paramedic training, a life he lived before his wife, Sarah, died in a car wreck 4 years ago, kicked in. Check the scene, safe, check the patient. Breathing shallow, pulse rapid but strong. Alcohol, too much, too fast. Now, here's the crossroads. The moment where your life splits into before and after. He could call security. He could call an ambulance. But he knew what that would look like. The paparazzi were vultures. A photo of the CEO being loaded onto a stretcher for alcohol poisoning would tank the stock price by morning. She'd be finished. Or he could walk away. Not his problem. But Elias Thorne wasn't built that way. He thought about Sarah. How nobody stopped to help her when her car spun out on I-5. He thought about Jojo waiting at home. He sighed, a heavy sound that echoed in the empty garage, and he made his choice. "Miss Sterling?" He whispered. No response. He scooped her up. She was lighter than she looked, frail almost. He didn't put her in the company limo. He put her in the back of his personal sedan, covered her with a blanket from his trunk, and drove. He didn't take her to a hotel to risky. He took her home, to her penthouse, because the doorman knew him and waved him through. He carried her up to the 40th floor, the penthouse silent and cold, feeling more like a museum than a home. He laid her on the bed, just on top of the covers, took off her shoes, and placed a glass of water and 2 aspirin on the nightstand. He turned to leave, hand on the doorframe, ready to vanish back into his invisible life, when he felt a hand grab his wrist. It was weak, clammy, but desperate. "Don't," Serafina slurred, her eyes half open, glazed and terrified. "Don't leave me, please." Not like he did. Elias stopped. He didn't know who he was, but he knew the sound of heartbreak. It sounded exactly like he did on the nights the grief for his wife got too loud to sleep. He looked at this powerful woman, stripped of her armor, begging not to be alone in the dark. "I won't leave, ma'am," Elias said softly. He gently removed her hand from his wrist. He didn't stay in the room. He walked out to the living room, sat on a stiff, modern armchair that cost more than his car, and he waited. He stared at the rain hitting the floor-to-ceiling windows. He texted the babysitter he'd be late. He didn't sleep. He listened to the storm and the silence of a lonely house. At 6 a.m., he made coffee. He cleaned up a broken wine glass in the kitchen she must have dropped before the party. When Serafina stumbled out of the bedroom an hour later, looking hungover and horrified, Elias was standing by the island, fully dressed in his uniform. "Coffee's hot," he said, his voice calm, giving her no room to panic. "You fell asleep in the garage. I brought you home. I sat in the chair all night. You're safe." Serafina stared at him, memories flashing in disjointed bursts. The rain, the cold concrete, the feeling of being carried. She looked at the coffee, then at him. You stayed. You asked me not to leave," Elias said simply. "So I didn't." He put his cap on. "I'll call a car for you later. Take the day, ma'am." And he walked out. He didn't ask for a thank you. He didn't want a bonus. He just wanted to go home and hug Jojo. But in the shadows of the parking garage the night before, a camera lens had flared, just once, a single click. Silas Vance sat in his office on Sunday night, a glass of scotch in his hand, staring at his laptop screen. The photo was grainy, taken by a junior assistant he'd bribed to keep an eye on Serafina. It showed Elias lifting Serafina into his car. Her head was lolled back, unconscious. His hands were on her waist. With a few keystrokes, Silas cropped the image. He darkened the edges. He adjusted the contrast until the gentle act of a man helping a sick woman looked like something darker, something predatory, a before picture of a crime. Silas smiled. Serafina had been getting too independent lately, talking about shaking up the executive board, talking about ethical transparency. She was a threat to his comfortable kingdom. But this was gold. If he played this right, he could neutralize the CEO by making her look like a victim of her own recklessness. And he could get rid of the driver to show he was taking decisive action. To birds. One lie. Silas drafted the police report himself. He used his authority as HR director. Suspected assault. Victim incapacitated. Predatory behavior by staff. He hit send. Took a sip of scotch and went to bed sleeping the sleep of the wicked. Which brings us back to Monday morning. The handcuffs, the walk of shame. Elias sat in the interrogation room, the metal table freezing against his skin. Detective Miller, a guy who looked like he'd seen it all and hated most of it, tossed the file on the table. "Your boss says you assaulted her," Miller said. Watching Elias's face, HR filed the report, said you took advantage of her intoxicated state, kidnapped her from the garage. Elias felt the room spin. "I helped her," he said, his voice steady, but his hands shaking under the table. "She was passed out. I took her home. I slept in the chair. Check the cameras, we will," Miller said, leaning back. "But right now it's her word against yours. And she's the billionaire. But here's the twist, it wasn't her word." Serafina didn't even know, up in the penthouse office. Serafina was staring at the cropped photo Silas had slid across her desk. "We handled it," Silas said, his voice oozing false sympathy. "We protected you, Serafina. The police have him. We told the press it was a security breach so your name stays out of the tabloids for now. You don't have to worry about him ever again." Serafina looked at the photo. She looked at Silas. Her head was still pounding from the hangover, her memory foggy. I don't remember an assault, Silas. I remember coffee. I remember he cleaned up the glass. Trauma blocks memories," Silas said smoothly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Trust me. Men like that, they rely on your silence. I did what had to be done." Serafina wanted to believe him. It was easier to believe him. It meant she was a victim, not a mess who passed out in a garage. It meant the company was protecting her. So she stayed silent. She let Elias sit in a cell for 24 hours. She let him get bailed out to find his tires slashed and Predator keyed into the hood of his car. She let him go home to a daughter who asked, "Daddy, why were you in jail?" and have no answer that made sense. Elias sat on the edge of Jojo's bed that night, the shame burning him alive. He had lost his job. His reputation was ash. He had $400 in his bank account, and rent was due in a week. He looked at the drawing Jojo had made, the stick figures holding hands. "Are you a bad man, Daddy?" Jojo asked, her voice small in the dark. Elias choked back a sob. "No, baby, I'm not. Sometimes. Sometimes people get scared, and they hurt other people to feel safe. But we don't do that. We tell the truth, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Elias decided then and there. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to take a plea deal. He was going to fight. But he didn't know that his savior wasn't going to be a lawyer, it was going to be the truth. Buried in a hard drive 3 floors underground. Because Serafina Sterling wasn't just a CEO. She was a woman who built a tech empire by finding patterns in data. And something about Silas's story didn't fit the pattern. The coffee, the aspirin, the fact that her clothes were untouched. On Wednesday night, sleepless and gnawed at by guilt, Serafina logged into the building's raw security server. Silas had blocked access to the garage files, flagging them as active investigation. But Serafina wrote the encryption code for this company 10 years ago. It took her 5 minutes to bypass the lock. She opened the file. She watched the footage. She saw herself slump against the tire. She saw Elias run over, not prowl, run. She saw him check her pulse. She saw him lift her like she was made of glass. She saw the care. She saw the respect. And then she saw the shadow in the corner, the flash of a phone screen. She zoomed in. It wasn't Elias. It was Silas's personal assistant, hiding behind a pillar. The rage that filled Serafina wasn't hot. It was cold, liquid nitrogen cold. She pulled up Silas's employment history. She dug into the archives, looking for other security incidents. And she found it. A file from 3 years ago. Arthur Pence, a finance manager accused of embezzlement, fired based on evidence provided by HR. Arthur had jumped off the Aurora Bridge 2 months later. Serafina opened Arthur's file. The evidence was flimsy. Edited screenshots, cropped photos, the exact same playbook. Silas hadn't just framed a driver. He had killed a man, and he was using Serafina as his weapon to do it again. Serafina closed her laptop. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. She had spent her whole career trying to be tough, trying to show no weakness. But Elias Thorne had seen her at her weakest, and he hadn't used it against her. He had protected her. And in return, she had let them put him in chains. She picked up her phone. She didn't call the lawyers. She called the building superintendent. "Unlock the auditorium," she said, "and send an alert to every employee, every board member, and every news outlet in the city. Mandatory meeting, 9 a.m., subject, the truth." The auditorium at Ether Dynamics was built to hold 500 people, but on Thursday morning, it felt like the entire city had squeezed inside. The air was thick, electric, with the kind of tension that comes before a thunderstorm. Word had leaked rumors of a scandal, a collapse, a resignation. Silas Vance sat in the front row, legs crossed. looking like the cat that not only ate the canary, but billed the bird for the meal. He checked his watch, annoyed. He expected Serafina to announce a leave of absence, leaving him as interim CEO. That was the plan. Break the driver, break the CEO, take the throne. At 9 o'clock sharp, the lights dimmed. Serafina walked onto the stage. She wasn't wearing her usual armor, no blazer, no high heels. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, and she looked tired. But her eyes were burning with a terrifying clarity. She didn't stand behind the podium. She walked right to the edge of the stage, looking down at Silas, then out at the sea of faces. The cameras broadcasting live to the local news. "I have a story to tell you," she began, her voice echoing in the silence. "It's a story about a hero and a villain. And for the last 4 days, I let you believe the wrong man was the villain." She clicked a remote. The massive screen behind her lit up. It wasn't a PowerPoint slide. It was the security footage, raw, unedited, time-stamped. The room gasped as they watched the video play. They saw Marcus Snow, Elias finding her. They saw the tenderness. They watched the timestamp roll for the entire drive. Then, the footage from the penthouse hallway camera. They saw Elias carry her in. They saw him walk out of the bedroom alone. They saw him sit in the chair. They saw him sit there for 6 hours, keeping watch. "This man," Serafina said, pointing at the screen where Elias was currently pouring water for a glass. "He would leave on her nightstand, is Elias Thorne. On Monday, he was arrested in our lobby for assault. He was spat on. He was called a predator. His car was vandalized." She paused, letting the shame settle over the room. "He didn't assault me. He saved me. I was intoxicated. I was vulnerable. And he protected me when I couldn't protect myself." Silas stood up in the front row, his face the color of a boiled lobster. "Rachel Serafina, this is inappropriate. You are violating privacy protocols. Turn that off. Sit down, Silas," she snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. "I'm not done." She clicked the remote again. A new image appeared. It was the photo Silas had leaked, the dark, cropped, menacing one. Next to it, the original wide shot from the security camera, showing the context, showing the assistant hiding in the shadows. Taking the picture, Silas Vance manufactured this evidence, she declared. "He filed a false police report in my name. He manipulated me, the police, and all of you to destroy an innocent man's life because it suited his narrative." The crowd began to murmur, a low roar of anger rising. "And he's done it before," Serafina continued, her voice dropping to a hush. A photo of Arthur Pence appeared on the screen, the finance manager who had committed suicide 3 years ago. "I looked into the archives last night. Arthur didn't embezzle a dime. Silas fabricated the logs to cover his own mismanagement of the pension fund. He destroyed Arthur to save himself, and he tried to do it to Elias." Silas was scrambling now, pushing past people in the aisle, trying to get to the exit. "This is slander. I'll sue. I'll own this company." "You won't own anything," a voice boomed from the back of the room. The doors swung open. Detective Miller walked in, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. But this time, they weren't looking for a driver. They were looking for a director. "Silas Vance," Miller shouted over the noise. "You are under arrest for fraud, filing false police reports, and accessory to manslaughter." The sound of the handcuffs clicking onto Silas's wrists was the sweetest sound Serafina had ever heard. The room erupted not in applause, but in a chaotic release of justice. People were shouting, filming, booing as Silas was dragged out, kicking and screaming about his lawyers. Serafina stood on the stage, watching him go. She didn't smile. She felt heavy. She looked at the camera at the back of the room, the one broadcasting live, to Elias Thorne. She said, looking straight into the lens, "I am sorry. I know sorry doesn't fix the tires. It doesn't fix the trauma your daughter felt. But I promise you, other dynamics will spend every day trying to make it right." She walked off the stage and kept walking. She went straight to her car. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on the peeling paint of apartment 3B in a modest brick building on the south side of the city. Elias opened the door. He was wearing sweatpants, holding a spatula, looking exhausted. Jojo was peeking out from behind his leg, when he saw Serafina standing there, stripped of her corporate armor, eyes red from crying. He didn't slam the door. He just waited. "I fixed it," she whispered. "Or, I started to. I saw on the news," Elias said, his voice guarded. "Are you the lady who got my daddy in trouble?" Jojo asked, stepping forward. Serafina knelt down, heedless of the dirty hallway floor. Yes, I am. And I made a huge mistake. I am so sorry." Jojo looked at her, tilting her head. "Daddy says everyone makes mistakes, but you have to fix them. Did you fix it?" "I put the bad man in jail," Serafina said. "And I came to ask your daddy for forgiveness." Jojo looked at Elias. Elias looked at Serafina. He saw the remorse etched into her face. He saw the woman who was just as lonely as he was, just trapped in a different kind of cage. "You wanted to come in?" Elias asked, stepping aside. "We're making pancakes. Chocolate chip." Serafina let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for a week. "I would love that." They sat at the small kitchen table. Serafina explained everything: the job offer, director of ethics, triple his salary, the full college scholarship for Jojo, the public apology, the lawsuit she was filing against the police department on his behalf. Elias listened, flipping pancakes. When she was done, he sat down. "I don't want the job," he said. Serafina blinked. "What?" "Elias, I don't want to work for Ether," he said gently. "Too many ghosts in that building now. But I've been trying to get a loan to start my own medical transport business. For seniors, people who need care, not just a ride." Serafina smiled. It was the first real smile he'd seen on her face. "Consider it funded. A grant, not a loan." "No strings. I'll take a loan," Elias corrected her, his pride ironclad. "With interest. I pay my own way." "Deal," she said. Months passed. The scandal faded from the headlines, replaced by the next big story. Silas Vance went to prison, trading his Italian suits for an orange jumpsuit. Other Dynamics cleared house, bringing in a board that actually cared about ethics. But the real ending of the story happened on a Tuesday. About 6 months later, Elias was parked outside an assisted living facility in his new Van Thorn medical transport, painted on the side. He was doing well. Jojo was in a private art class on weekends. His phone buzzed. It was Serafina. "Board meeting ended early. I'm craving pancakes. You busy?" Elias smiled, looking at the drawing Jojo had taped to his dashboard. It was a new one. 3 stick figures now. Him, Jojo, and a blonde lady holding a coffee cup. The sun was bigger in this one. "Always time for pancakes," he texted back. He put the van in gear and drove. Not as a servant, not as a victim, but as a man who had walked through the fire and came out holding the water bucket. You see, the world is always going to have people like Silas Vance, people who mistake kindness for weakness, who think they can crush the little guy to build their own pedestal. And the world will always have systems that are quick to judge a book by its cover, or a man by his skin color. But as long as there are people like Elias, people who do the right thing when no one is watching, people who hold onto their dignity when the world tries to strip it away, there's hope. So I have to ask you, if you found your boss unconscious in a parking garage, knowing the risks, knowing how it looks, would you have stopped, or would you have kept walking? It's an easy question to answer now, but in the dark, in the rain, that's where character lives. Let me know what you do in the comments. And if you believe that the truth eventually wins, give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that good guys might finish last, but they finish with their souls intact. Thanks for watching. I'm out.